Together with Liz and Cliona, I'm part of the project team at NUI Galway for the Voices project. So before we get started and I hand over to our chair for today, Alberto Vasquez, I just wanted to say a few brief words of welcome and to tell you a little bit about the Voices project for those of you who might not have heard of us before. So I've been reading some work by Amy Tan, the fiction writer, and she talks about asking questions when she's telling stories. So she says that when she's telling stories, she thinks about three things. She thinks about why do things happen, how do things happen, and how do I make things happen. And I think those are questions that we can all reflect on when we think about social change, and especially in the context of today's discussion around consent and refusal in medical treatment, with specific emphasis on the experiences of people in the mental health system. So the Voices project really came from an idea I had about social change. And it's born out of different types of frustration. So on the one hand, frustration with going to the kinds of academic conferences where it feels like it's the same people talking to each other over and over and not getting anywhere. And on the other hand, a kind of frustration from sitting in rooms with policymakers where I see very few people with lived experience in the room, and if they're there, they're not taken seriously or not treated with respect. So I wanted to do something a bit different that would bring together people who have different kinds of knowledge. So whether that's knowledge of scholarship and research, or knowledge of how things happen in the world, or knowledge of their own lived experience, or of how to create change. And that's really the impetus for how we designed the Voices project. Throughout this project, we're bringing together pairs of storytellers and respondents. All of our storytellers have lived experience of exercising or being denied their legal capacity in different ways. So today's focus is on exercising and being denied legal capacity in the context of mental health, particularly in regards to medical treatment. So when we think about how to create change, we have to think both individually and collectively about our responsibilities when we see injustice in the world. So I like the questions that Amy Tan poses about how do I make things happen, because they reinforce the fact that we all share responsibility for making things happen, whether the things that happen are replicating or reinforcing the status quo, or whether they're leading to some sort of radical transformation. So if we ask those questions of ourselves today, we'll start to unpack the intersecting dimensions of power, social and legal control that are experienced by people in different contexts. We'll also be hearing about what happens when the long arm of coercion extends beyond the walls of medical facilities into communities and homes. We'll hear about people who have been subjected to different intersecting identities or labels that might have been used to suppress them, and those labels or identities might relate to a mental health or a disability diagnosis, or they might be about gender, class, race, or nationality, or some sort of combination of those factors. I think it's important to remember that we're not just here to document injustice, although that is a very important part of what today is about. We're here to learn about the experience of non-coercive support, which can and do work well for people with all labels and none, including in situations of crisis and extreme distress. We're here to think differently about the law itself and the systems it polices or legitimizes, including the medical system, and to imagine together how things might be different if the law recognised our chosen relationships of trust instead of imposing hierarchies of power and control. And I think I'd like to end with a quote that's often attributed to Lila Watson. She herself has said that she's not comfortable being attributed this quote to her because it was part of a collective process, and prefers that it is credited to the Aboriginal activist group in Queensland of the 1970s. She says, "If you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time, but if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together." And I think that's a really good thought to carry with us throughout today. So I'd like us to start and continue throughout the day by imagining how we might create a better world, how we might create and take collective responsibility for that journey of change, and acknowledge our incredible privilege in being present here today to listen to our speakers who bring a wealth of knowledge and experience to the table. So with that, I'll hand you over to Alberto, who is our chair for the day and is going to introduce you to this morning's speakers. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Elena, for this I think, very good presentation of the day. We have a very interesting agenda and a very diverse group of presenters. You have all, I think, the bios of all the presenters, so I'm going to be very short with the introductions. And I just will start handing the microphone to Mrs. Tina Minkovitz, a lawyer and survivor of psychiatry, one of the key persons during the negotiation of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability, and she's going to speak about free and informed consent and the right to refuse treatment.
Just changing my glasses. These are better. Okay, so thank you very much for including me. I really enjoyed yesterday and getting to meet and learn from the storytellers and responders and everyone else. Let's go right into it. So I'm going to discuss, this is an overview of how I'm structuring it. I'm going to discuss the, okay, I've got it. What I really am going to present on is the CRPD, what the CRPD does to free and informed consent. What's the difference between a pre-CRPD approach and CRPD to understanding free and informed consent as a human right, and what that means for users and survivors of psychiatry, people with psychosocial disabilities, and people in dealing with the mental health system. I'll start with CRPD text and jurisprudence, just a brief indication of which text provisions I'm going to be referring to. Discuss the understanding of free and informed consent as a human right, the pre-CRPD and CRPD approaches to consent, and what it means to make free and informed consent meaningful for using and/or refusing mental health services. I believe that the plain language abstract you have for my presentation may actually give even a better view than what I'm going to present, so I refer you to that as well. Okay, these are the CRPD freedoms that are related to the right to free and informed consent, the provisions on legal capacity on an equal basis with others, and all measures related to legal capacity must respect the person's will and preferences. This is the key difference between the CRPD and pre-CRPD approaches, is that everyone has legal capacity. Free and informed consent in healthcare for persons with disabilities on an equal basis with others. Article 25, liberty and security of the person on an equal basis and no deprivation of liberty based on disability in Article 14. That is key, along with Article 12, legal capacity, in ensuring that that states have the obligation to abolish commitment to mental health services or facilities, and freedom from torture and other ill treatment, Article 15. The CRPD committee, which interprets the convention, has issued a general comment number 1 on legal capacity, and guidelines on Article 14 on liberty. I'm just referring to these briefly to indicate what is going to be relevant. So there can be no restriction of legal capacity, the right to make decisions, the opportunity to make decisions based on actual or perceived mental capacity. No matter what anyone perceives as my skills or lack of skills in decision making, no one can interfere with my act of decision making. And that is a very key innovation and revolution in the CRPD. When it may not be possible to actually determine my will and preferences, if you're trying to see what I actually want so you can respond appropriately, and it's really in good faith, you really aren't getting it from me. In certain situations, you can make a best interpretation of my response when you've made significant efforts to give me all kinds of support and accommodations to derive and understand what I'm trying to express as my will and preferences, then you can make a best interpretation of my will and preferences. You do not make a best interest determination just saying, you know, if I was in that situation, I would want such and such, or I think this is what's best for Tina right now, therefore this is what I'm going to do. So the best interpretation replaces the best interest determination. That's a key feature of the CRPD as interpreted by General Comment Number 1. I have a right to refuse support. You can offer me all the support you want. If I tell you, go away, I don't want anything from you, you have to obey. You know, you can't impose support on me. And if I do accept support, I have the right to decide what kind of support I want. I have legal capacity at all times, including in crisis situations. All these are features that are set out in the general comment. So the situations that the mental health system will coercively intervene against a person's will are usually called crisis or emergency, and the CRPD says that I have legal capacity at all those times. So I have the right to make my own decisions and to not be coercively intervened. And they have to provide me access to independent support and non-medical options in relation to mental health treatment decisions. So it's not complying with the CRPD if you say, you know, the psychiatrist comes to me and says, here's what I'm giving you, you know, take this drug or, you know, or go away, you know, and take this drug and, you know, whatever. There has to be provided, and I'm going to help you decide. The psychiatrist says, I'm going to help you decide, this is the drug that I'm going to give you, and that's all they say. No, that there has to be some independent support available for me to make a decision, and there have to be non-medical options. They have to tell me, well, you know, you can have peer support, you can go do yoga, there's all kinds of things, and this drug is one possibility, and some people like it and some people don't. Involuntary commitment in mental health facilities violates both Article 12 on equal legal capacity and Article 14 on liberty. Because it's essentially, mental health facility is a health facility. There should be no deprivation of liberty in relation to, you know, making me healthy. It should be, you know, it's my choice whether to go into a hospital or not to go into a hospital, and it violates the right to equality in relation to liberty and security of the person. And non-consensual treatment violates the right to legal capacity, the right to liberty and security of the person. I have the right to be secure in my own person from any forced interventions, and the right to freedom from torture and other ill treatment. And I know I'm not going to get to go through everything. So there's also entitlements in the CRPD that are complementary to these freedoms. Access to support and accommodations in exercising legal capacity. If I want those supports, I have a right to have them. I have a right to have support services for living in community and preventing isolation. I have a right to adequate standard of living and to have social protection programs if I'm not making that, you know, happen myself. And the right to health care and services, including those related to disability. So if I want the medical model, mental health services, if I want treatment from a psychiatrist, I have a right to that. I also have a right to the non-medical kinds of support that are provided for in relation to living in the community and support and accommodations in exercising legal capacity. So if we want to advocate for a whole different non-medical approach, some of us have been using Article 19 or Article 19 together with Article 12 to get away from the mental health system. Okay, meaning of free and informed consent from a human rights perspective. If I'm looking at the right to free and informed consent in healthcare from a human rights perspective. What do I, as the rights holder, when I go to my doctor, what does the right to free and informed consent mean to me? So I see it as the requirement of free and informed consent protects my personal autonomy and my physical and mental integrity. It protects my body against having the doctor do any kind of unwanted things to me. It protects my personal autonomy, my freedom to choose what I would like and what I would not like to have from the doctor. So you have actually three things. You have consent. There has to actually be consent. So medical personnel are prohibited from acting without consent. That is also sometimes stated as the right to refuse treatment is a logical corollary of the right to free and informed consent. There's no free and informed consent if there's no consent required, if the doctor can actually do something to me against my will and I have no right to refuse. The consent has to be free. So the medical personnel cannot employ force, coercion, incentive, deception, or undue influence. I see all of those things as part of freedom, including deception, because deception, for instance, that's rampant in the mental health system. You know, they will just refuse to tell you. They just say, oh, this drug is going to improve your thinking skills. Or they'll say electroshock improves your memory when we all know that it destroys your memory. And I see that as an active deprivation of the right to free consent, not only informed consent, because I see it as an active, deliberate kind of attempt to coerce. And it has to be informed. The medical personnel must provide the rights holder with information that is complete, accurate, accessible, and they have to give you the ability to have your questions answered. So often, what informed consent means is that it's actually designed for the medical provider to avoid liability. So if anything, you're given a form and it lists like all the awful things that can happen to you, not so much in the mental health system, more in the physical health system, and you're just supposed to sign. I don't see that as fulfilling the human right to free and informed consent. You know, they have to give you the information that you want in a form that works for you, and they have to be able to answer your questions. So if I, not just like give you something that protects them, so I would see it as they have to give you the ability to have your questions answered. Before the CRPD, and as we know in the laws of all the countries that we're dealing with, competence was thought to be part of free and informed consent. So this notion of mental capacity, your decision-making skills, was built into and is built into how the concept of free and informed consent is applied in the law. So sometimes it can be thought to negate your ability to give free consent, or it can be framed as you're not properly informed because we don't think that you understand it well enough. So it can be used, the concept of decision-making competence, what the CRPD committee calls the conflation of mental capacity with legal capacity, using your alleged poor mental capacity to deprive you of the legal capacity, the right to make decisions. It's framed as somehow making it impossible for your consent to actually be free or informed. That's against a rights holder-based understanding of free and informed consent, because that's using the concept of free and informed consent against me as a gatekeeper, not to fulfill my human rights, but to say, no, this human right doesn't apply to you because you're not qualified to exercise this human right. That's what the CRPD goes against. The CRPD says everyone is qualified to exercise and enjoy the right to control their own body and health. So that's the key of what the CRPD actually changes in relation to free and informed consent. We're taking the whole notion of competence or capacity out of the equation, and free and informed consent becomes purely a human right that every rights holder is empowered to exercise. And I think it is important to talk about that and to understand it that way. To understand free and informed consent as a human right helps us to show why that competence standard is wrong and destructive, because it means that people with disabilities, people who are labeled with a psychiatric diagnosis, or people who have any other kind of cognitive disability or learning disability, are somehow set outside the people who are deemed to be qualified to defend our own bodies and minds against things that we don't want to have happen to us. The political character of this use of this destructive use of free and informed consent to keep people, to prevent people from actually exercising that right, is highlighted in the mental health context, where the nature of treatment and the risks and benefits of treatments are actually highly controversial and disputed. And the mental health system is really set up in a way, because of the permission for forced treatment under the law, that is adversarial. The doctor is adversarial to the client, or to the person who doesn't want to be a client. They can create their own clients against the client's will. So for that reason, and because the treatments are used to control and punish people, the political character of this negative use of competence in free and informed consent is highlighted in the mental health context. The rights holder is decentered. It contributes to the use of free and informed consent to protect the medical personnel from liability, and it satisfies lawyers who think, okay, you know, we're anxious about, you know, who is qualified to make decisions, and we're going to assign an authorized decision maker. And instead, that the legal system also needs to change the way it thinks about what it means to make decisions, and, you know, that there has to be some kind of qualification to actually exercise my human right to defend myself and, you know, exercise my autonomy in all respects to live the way I choose. So I think I've actually said all of that about the CRPD. With CRPD, with no competence element, free and informed consent no longer regulates the rights holder, only the duty bearers. Free and informed consent, as a human right, imposes regulations on the state and on medical personnel. It doesn't regulate me, I'm the rights holder. And so the paradigm shift is beneficial not only to people with disabilities, but to society as a whole, because it puts free and informed consent more firmly as a human right for everyone. Issues of free and informed consent in the mental health system. Forced treatment, many of us experience forced treatment as nothing but state-sponsored violence. And we frame that in international law terms as a violation of the right to be free from torture and ill treatment. I have written about this, and Special Rapporteur on Torture Manfred Novak wrote a report in 2008 where he substantially adopted our formulation. He said that intrusive and irreversible treatments aimed at correcting or alleviating a disability may amount to torture or ill treatment if they're enforced against the person's will or administered without the free and informed consent of the person concerned. So free and informed consent of the person concerned means it's my free and informed consent, no substitute decision maker, so that's accepting the CRPD framework, that we're not doing a competence thing of free and informed consent. It's my free and informed consent that counts. And we can discuss more on that, about forced treatment as torture. For many of us, like I said, we need Okay, I think I've said that. So that implies that there has to be an unequivocal absolute prohibition of all coercive mental health interventions. This needs to be incorporated into law. Mental health laws, legislation that allows forced treatment and commitment to mental health facilities. And it's not, if it's contained in, usually there's a mental health act and you know it, and that's where the involuntary treatment stuff is. Sometimes the provisions may be contained in other kinds of laws, they may be hidden or disguised in some way. All of those kind of laws, I call mental health laws, like apartheid laws or sodomy laws, they have to be abolished and not reformed. And that's the other key innovation of the CRPD, is where we say, you know, all this messing around with procedural safeguards, criteria for commitment, forget all of that. It all has to be abolished. It's all destructive. It's all discriminatory. It's all a violation of the human rights of people with psychosocial disabilities or people labeled with psychiatric diagnoses. And the existence of forced treatment taints the possibility of any free and informed consent in mental health. So even if you come to the mental health system as a voluntary patient, you want their services, you know that if you don't accept what they're offering you, they have the power to force you against your will. And so this means that many people are led to give their formal consent when they really don't want it. Many people are led to give consent because they're afraid they're going to be committed, or they want to satisfy their families, or for all these other reasons that are not really about, yes, I think this is the best thing for me. So we need to address that as I mean, because it's a human right also, simply to not have forced treatment done to you, but it also taints the possibility of any truly free and informed consent so long as that possibility exists. So I have these slides on law reform. I think that we have to, holistic and comprehensive approach to CRPD implementation. And I have used the reparations framework in international law, or I have promoted this, the framework that for serious human rights violations, there needs to be, the state needs to provide remedy and reparation to victims. Reparation isn't only about giving money, the forms of reparation are satisfaction, guarantees of non-repetition, restitution, compensation, and rehabilitation. So things like if you have been put on psychiatric drugs and you've become addicted to it, so you suffer withdrawal symptoms in your body if you try to go off, the state has a duty to provide you with support in getting off those drugs. That could be a form of rehabilitation, and many other kinds of, it could signal a break in the existing policy. Apology, but only an apology if it's based on we're actually stopping these violations now. Don't give me an apology if you're going to continue forced treatment, if the system continues, so I'm still at risk of it. And that's guarantees of non-repetition also. Okay, so CRPD, free and informed consent, beyond abolishing the legal basis of forced treatment, the legal permission for forced treatment. There are duties placed on medical personnel. There have to be, under law, duties placed on medical personnel to comply with CRPD standards. Respect decisions, the person's decisions at all times, including a crisis situation. The best interpretation after significant effort replaces the best interest determination, if you really can't tell. And I would also say that I actually think certain kinds of decisions relating to the person's physical and mental integrity, you cannot make a best interest interpretation. It's one thing if the person is going to bleed to death, if they've been in an accident, but certain kinds of very personal decisions, like you can say abortion, sterilization, and I would include psychiatric drugs, electroshock psychosurgery, should not be the subject of a best interpretation, only an actual affirmative positive consent to avoid, covert abuse of that. They need to discuss the treatment directly with the person concerned and seek their response, not the response of a supporter, unless the person is saying, my supporter is going to speak for me. I think you could, but you have to get the consent of the actual person. They have to provide accurate and accessible information about the proposed treatment, including non-medical options, and wait and watch. You don't have to do anything. Even with a physical health situation, you don't always have to actively do something. You can wait and see what develops. And people in the mental health system need to understand that as well. And understand also that there are non-medical ways of understanding what's going on, and the medical people are only one side, and they have to accept that these other understandings exist. They have to maintain good practices of accessibility, accommodations, and access to independent support for treatment decisions. Systemically, there are things that we need to do to ensure freedom and to ensure the information aspect of informed consent. So, to ensure the freedom aspect, these are some ways that subtle coercion has been built into systems, ways that subtle coercion and of mental health treatments has been built into actually many systems. So, these are some things we need to avoid. The bundling of services. For instance, you get a housing program through the mental health system, and it requires you to be under the care of a psychiatrist and to go to a day treatment program and to accept whatever medication the psychiatrist is prescribing, or simply to take some kind of psychiatric medication. That completely makes it impossible for you to be exercising free and informed consent to the treatment. Also, requirement in the penal system, anything that requires compliance with mental health treatment for parole, probation, being considered that you're on good behavior, diversion, or restorative justice measures. You can't say that you're doing any of those things and having compliance with mental health treatment as a feature of what you have to abide by. Things like parole and probation, they're going to have requirements. You have been convicted of a crime, or you're, so you have certain requirements, but they can't, because your health and your body is essentially, should be more or less sacrosanct in the law. What goes into your body and how you deal with your own health should not be a feature of legal intervention or behavior control. Excuse me. Maybe I could get something with my water. Okay, so the culture of compliance in mental health services needs to be eliminated. I don't know if you talk about that here. We talk about that a lot in the United States, that there's a culture of compliance, and fear, shame, and misinformation are used as tactics to enforce or obtain the person's compliance. The idea that you're supposed to comply is somehow very much upheld, and this undermines people's self-confidence and, in many ways creates, it creates a kind of, it creates a very abusive relationship in the mental health system, and a violent relationship. So, we also have to eliminate situations where the family or other members of the community are using threat, deception, coercion, force, exclusion, and withholding of resources as a way to make somebody comply with mental health services. So you often find that somebody is putting drugs in a person's food, or just using all kinds of informal coercion. And obviously it's difficult for the state to reach what's going on inside a family or inside a community outside of any kind of regulated service or support system, but there have to be, you could say, measures undertaken at least to educate and inform people about their rights, and inform everyone involved about the duty to avoid these kinds of threats and coercion, and to respect the person's decision making. If you can't support somebody, there's ways, there's aspects of community life that always have to be up for negotiation, because if somebody isn't respecting my rights, I may not want them around me, but I can't say to this person, you have to take this drug, and if you want to live with me. I can say to them, you have to change your behavior. You're doing some stuff that I can't live with, and if the drug helps you change your behavior, if that's something that works for you, that may work for you. But I can't say this is the way that you have to change your behavior. You have to take this drug to control your behavior. Similarly, housing providers, education providers, health and social service providers cannot be refusing to serve individuals who resist mental health treatment. And I know of a situation, and I'm sure there's many, many more. One health provider was not wanting to give a woman chemotherapy for cancer because she refused to take antidepressant drugs. Okay? This woman is a very strong advocate. She went and got another cancer doctor. She's a survivor. She's an extremely proactive researcher. She's surviving today. But if she was not so proactive, she might not be surviving today. So we have to make sure that there's a change in the culture and a change in, whatever legal regulation. Okay. Also, often other kind of settings for people with dementia, for children with disabilities, all kinds of situations, people are locked and drugged when they should not be. And they're, even often without any kind of, often it's not subject to any kind of laws like the mental health laws, but all of this needs to be eliminated. Don't regulate those things like the mental health laws, just eliminate them. Other systemic measures related to information: establish standards for information provided on mental health treatments such as psychoactive drugs, electroshock, and psychosurgery that are based on unbiased evidence, independent from industry sources, and take full account of adverse effect, the dubious efficacy of these treatments, and the nature of the treatment as a somatic remedy for psychological distress. Get rid of that chemical imbalance because it's a falsehood. We know that the chemical imbalance theory is an idea. It's a speculation. There's no proof of it, and it's even an unscientific and unprovable theory because it reduces the functioning of complex human consciousness to something physical. And I want to know, okay, so if schizophrenia is something in a chemical imbalance, where's the chemical imbalance that makes you a psychiatrist? Because what you're talking about is exactly as complex a phenomenon as what makes you a psychiatrist, what makes me a lawyer. I'd like to know what makes you label me as schizophrenic and where that is in your brain. So we need to look at informed consent in a way that is accurate and that isn't reinforcing bias of what really needs to be exposed as pseudoscientific treatments. So people should be free to choose psychoactive drugs if it works for them, but we need to have a much higher standard than we do now of how we prescribe the drugs, and also what we understand as the relevant the nature of these treatments. You're taking a mind-altering drug to achieve a certain purpose. Don't pretend that it's something different than what it is. We have to provide an easily accessible system for service users to report adverse effects. I think the state needs to take some responsibility for this. NGOs can supplement, but I think there should be a state system and users should be able to report these effects. It should be accessible to provide accurate information and not have to go through treatment providers who are, often they're the ones who are disregarding when people are saying what is actually happening in their own bodies. We have to overhaul research and oversight mechanisms of essentially mostly psychiatric drug and electroshock devices and treatments to disengage these mechanisms from industry. Shift policy and resource emphasis to a new paradigm of social inclusion, user-driven supports for distress and madness based on Articles 12 and 19. I have a couple of resources on that. I hope people are that there's going to be sharing my PowerPoint in some form that's available. This is complementary to doing away with force and coercion because the new paradigm is based on mutual respect for autonomy, maintaining connection in times of distress. We're not talking about what the pro-force advocates want to say, leaving you to die with your rights on, like, oh, I'm just going to walk past you, I don't care. No. You maintain connection in times of distress. We're all fellow human beings. If you want me to go away, I do have to respect that. I can care about you, and maybe that's the connection that I can maintain, caring about you from but I have to respect that you tell me to go away because you have a right to not have a relationship with me. You don't have. So maintaining connections in times of distress and tension, unlike the medical model that is managerial and hierarchical, objectifying and depersonalizing illness and symptoms. Now, I know also that I'm sure there are people in the room who will disagree with me. There are users and users of mental health services who accept the medical model and may dispute some of what I'm saying about it. This has been my experience and the experience of many of us working from an alternative perspective, and I think that the alternative paradigm has to be at least the foundation, and the medical supports can be a supplement for people who feel that that is what works for them. So somehow, if there's disagreement, we need to figure it out among ourselves. Okay, and conclusion, all right. Just to sum up, so free and informed consent is inseparable from the logical corollary of the right to refuse treatment. The right to refuse, which is the same as the right to actual consent, or the duty of obtaining consent before you do anything, the right to refuse and duty to respect refusal is a starting point for CRPD-compliant law and policy reform. So don't try to make reforms that are trying to get around the CRPD in some way. Don't try to put mental health coercion into a mental capacity act, no, that's, maybe you think you're complying with Article 14, but you're actually not, and then you're still violating Article 12. We have all the rights. We have the right to all of them. You can't just do it like one at a time. Okay, and additional measures are needed, systemic measures and measures to ensure and enforce the right to free and informed consent on the level of the individual going to your doctor, or not going to your doctor. CRPD, by eliminating competence as a component of consent, allows us to unequivocally center the rights holder perspective. So free and informed consent is a human right, not as a kind of gatekeeping as to who gets to exercise the right. And finally, users and survivors of mental health services should lead reforms and monitoring, because that was actually a key feature of how we created the CRPD. The CRPD was created, it's been said, 80% written by civil society, and that's mostly people with disabilities. Users and survivors of psychiatry were a key constituency active in creating these standards, and it needs to be the same going forward. I will say one more final thing that's not in here, and there's a resources slide, but you can Google these things. I didn't provide the web links. I am working on, I'm kind of organizing what I'm calling a campaign for the absolute prohibition of commitment, mental health commitment or commitment and forced treatment. If anybody is working on these issues or interested in, and you support this absolute prohibition and you're interested in it, please see me and, I'll connect you up with it. Thank you.
Foundations, theoretical and legal foundations for the dialogues and discussions of today. Now, we will have some time for question and answer later, so keep your questions pending. We will have now some voices from the Global South. We have Mrs. Sitawa Wafula, which is a multi-award-winning blogger and a very strong activist in Kenya. And she's going to be, through the magic of technologies, with Andrea Parra, a Colombian advocate, an attorney, that she's going to be joining us through a video. And they will be part of this important aspect of the Voices Project, which is storytelling and responses to those presentations. So, sit down.
Hi everyone, my name is Andrea Parra, and I'm really sorry that I can't stay for the rest of the day, but Sitawa and I have been talking, and we want to share with you some of the insights in the conversations that we've had. Hi Sitawa.
Hi everyone.
Who are you?
I'm Sitawa Fula. I am a poet and a blogger, and I'm also a rape survivor with a dual diagnosis of epilepsy and bipolar.
Can you tell me a story?
The story I will share with you all today is a story of a day I went into hospital to have my medication dosage reduced, and the medication I was going to have the dosage reduced for is for the bipolar diagnosis. And when I was there, we had a conversation with the doctor, and he had agreed to reduce the dosage, but unfortunately I had a seizure. And when I came back from the seizure, he changed his mind about reducing the dosage. So when we started having a conversation about it, and just me reminding him that before I had the seizure, he already agreed to it, then we sort of started having a back and forth. And the more the conversation escalated, he said, "You're raising your voice, you're getting very angry and loud, and I think your mania is rising up." And before I knew it, I had been jumped and I was put in an isolation room, which I stayed for 2 days before I was put in the general ward, and then eventually I was picked from hospital by my family.
Why did you decide to reduce your dosage? What was the journey like?
The reason I had gone to hospital to have my dosage reduced is because I've gotten into a regime of self-care. I put in a lot of work and effort to stop being over-reliant to the medication because of its side effects. So the medication I was on would basically, I had a really unproductive sort of schedule because then I'd wake up in the morning, have my breakfast, take my medication, sleep because it just makes me really drowsy. So sleep till maybe almost lunchtime, and then have my lunch, take my medication, sleep a little bit more, and then, so it was sort of a very unproductive vicious cycle. So getting into sort of alternative things like, I like art a lot. I like doing, they're called DIYs, do yourself projects. I love being out in nature, ecotherapy. I like writing a lot. So having those other things that I'll do that will really help boost my mental well-being were part of the process, and even being part of talk therapy were some of the things that really help boost my mental health. And based on previous discussions, it was a good time for me to go and have the dosage reduced.
How did the actions that this doctor took have an impact on you?
So I felt that I put in so much work to get to where I was. Even the number of seizures I was getting had massively reduced. So for him to do that really felt like all the hard work, because it's sort of a full-time job sometimes to take care of yourself. And you worked really hard, and it's just diminished by the fact that someone feels that they went to school for so many years and they feel like they sort of have quote-unquote authority, or it was more like a power dynamics sort of thing that felt that what I'd done sort of didn't have as much, didn't hold any water, so to say.
How do you think the policies and laws in Kenya reinforce these power dynamics in the relationship between doctors and patients?
I think the over-reliance on the opinion of the doctors and their decisions as stipulated by the laws, and then it's sort of the doctors have the final word as opposed to the person with the lived experience, the person who owns the body and knows the ups and downs, having a place or a part to play in the decision making of their well-being.
Who is your community?
I have a diverse network that I consider my community. So I have people in the art field that I consider my community because that's one of the best therapies. That's one of the places that I thrive most when I'm doing my artwork. So I consider them my community. My friends and family play a really big role. So they are part of my community. People who follow my blog and who conversate with me online are also a very big part of my community because it's good to know that you're not alone in all this, that in as much as there isn't that much information about living with mental health or diagnosis, there's still a group of people who show up every day, regardless of how hard it is for them. So they they play a big part in being my community and also my spiritual family.
You taught me that this is a common saying in Kenya. If you're not at the table, you're part of the menu. What does it mean in this context?
Okay, so if you're not at the table, you're part of the menu. Simply means that if you don't rise up and you don't speak, then you're an item that may or not be gotten to. But if you're on the table, it means that you can be able to place your views, you can be able to say, this is how this medication makes me feel, this is how this thing works or doesn't work for me, this is what works for me. It's not documented, it's not scientific, it's not whatever else evidence you want to say. All the things that you give me are evidence-based, but then this is what works for me. So being on the table is being part of that conversation, and a lot of people with mental health diagnoses are rarely, their voices are rarely heard, and if they're only put on the menu for sort of cosmetic purposes, just to have a checklist, to just check it off the list that we had someone, but we didn't really hear their voice.
Where do you think this project could go?
The project, the Voices project, I definitely and strongly believe it will go far because one, I love the name and the word voices in the sense that if this is war, our voices are our weapons, and if this is everyday living, our voices are our tools, and we exercise them in every single thing we do, and that's where it all begins, with our voices, with us speaking out in each and every platform that we get, whether people are hearing or they're not hearing, we just keep speaking out.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dawa, for your voice and for the dialogue you have shared with us. We have a second pair that is going to provide us a new story and a new response. They are two current students of the center, of this center. We have Fiona Anderson, who is studying currently an LLM on International and Comparative Disability Law and Policy, and we have Boshen, who is currently doing a PhD also here at the center. So Fiona Anderson is going to start sharing her story, and then we will have Boshen with the response. So Fiona, it's with you.
Good morning. My name, as you know, is Fiona Anderson. And when I speak, the first thing you'll notice is my unusual accent. I'm wondering exactly where I'm from. Well, I'm a confused identity. To begin with, my historical background is I was born in Dublin on the 4th of January 1965, and I'm the youngest of 6 children. We immigrated to Australia in 1967, and I returned to Ireland in July 1982. The place where I resided, I moved from a busy suburb of Melbourne, a vibrant city, to a location in North Mayo. And that had one shop a mile down the road from me. However, it only took me about 6 weeks to settle in, and I began to do my leaving certificate at a school. And the school was an all-Irish language speaking college, and I had no language skills of Irish. So I studied through the textbooks, which were in English. I actually managed to pass my leaving certificate, and I say, if I run a bookies on all the people that said I wouldn't pass my leaving certificate, I would have made a fortune. I returned to Melbourne in October 1995, having spent 6 months in a psychiatric facility and 9 months as an outpatient. So I actually, through the generosity of one of my parents and my family, to try and give me a new start, I went to Melbourne. I was employed eventually as a telephone consultant in the Qantas frequent flyer program, and my nickname in the office was Trouble. And not because I caused trouble, but because if they saw me coming near their desks, I had trouble on my line. I returned to Ireland in December 2000, and I've been here since. I returned to Ireland for many reasons, mainly due to my ongoing health conditions, because I had a lot of absenteeism from my work and I couldn't sustain it. My mental health disorder, the source of origin. I'll begin with the source of origin. Is it a hormonal disorder or is it a psychiatric disorder? To begin the story, I refer to my diagnosis of bipolar affective disorder, which was made in March 1989, prior to my diagnosis of PCOS and endometriosis. I brought it to the attention of the mental health service providers of the time that I had difficulties for about a fortnight prior to the onset of my menses. This raises question marks over the source of origin of my mood swing disorder, and whether it is due to hormonal fluctuations caused by lack of estrogen, which decreases with the PCOS, which is polycystic ovarian syndrome, and the treatments for endometriosis when you have too much estrogen is to decrease the estrogen. Symptomatically, they are akin, the mood swings from PCOS and endometriosis, to that of bipolar affective disorder. Through my reading, research and experiences, I've noticed a high incidence of dual diagnosis for women with PCOS and bipolar affective disorder. I don't deny the presence of mood swings. However, I am querying and questioning whether the hormonal fluctuation is the source or is it purely a psychiatric disorder. From research even, it's been established that some men with mood swing disorders have low estrogen levels, which can be easily confirmed by a blood test. Introducing a small dose of estrogen can improve the incidences of mood swings. I've had my hormonal levels taken many times, and even at times when I've had my mood swing problems. And my hormonal results always come back as a mess. They're everywhere and anywhere, but where they actually should be. I've been fighting a losing battle with the psychiatric experts to have the source of origin recognised as hormonal fluctuations closely associated with a psychiatric disorder, but there is a very distinct difference between them. Most of my medical conditions are an unfortunate amalgamation of my genes. I've had no choice in their existence, and it is a complicated and complex situation to contend with, and their associated effects on a daily basis. My first episode. My first episode actually began in December 1998, and I noted that it coincided with the onset of my menses. I experienced an estrogen slip at the time, and I knew something was amiss, and my behavioural pattern was erratic and irrational. My first admission interview, I was confronted by 3 senior house officers and 4 nurses in a very confined space for my admission interview. I was in a highly charged mental and emotional disarray and frame of mind. I honestly terrified to find myself in this position. Excuses are made that it was circa 1989 and the Mental Health Treatment Act 1945 would not provide protection to patients who were involuntarily detained. Under this Act, consultant survivors had a broad range of powers and authority which could be wielded at their whim, and no questions or explanations were required. Whilst retaining full legal capacity consent to medical treatments was an unknown concept, and this was where my naivety was evident, as I thought there was going to be some element of choice in the treatment that was about to be begun. I come now to the subject of lithium therapy. Due to my diagnosis of bipolar affective disorder, it was considered that the appropriate form of treatment was a substance called lithium, which is basically a salt. It has the potential to have adverse effects on the kidney function and thyroid. In October 1990, it was mooted by outside sources that because I had been lumbered with this label, that this treatment would be appropriate for my needs. Someone who thought they were doing the right thing by me, and I appreciate their trying to do that, unfortunately, I found the medical services, when I asked them not to discuss my illness or my treatment with this source, it was ignored. And they actually held 2 conversations with them that day and didn't actually record the conversations. But in the records it does state where I asked that I really didn't want to discuss it with them. As I said, they were doing it in my best interest, as they thought. And because it had worked for so many other people, that they thought it would work for me. So, chronic kidney disease. I discovered in 2005 in the remains of my psychiatric files for the period of March to 1989 to 1995. The significant, important files declared missing or could not be found, with an exclamation mark. I immediately brought this to the attention of the renal specialist that I discovered 3 times in urine samples before my ECT that I had renal dysfunction due to the lithium therapy, However, it remained ignored at that time. I found out about it 11 years later, and I'll be blunt, I was hopping mad. And immediately I set about to try and get it removed. I was told when I went to an appointment late 2005 to give it another 4 or 5 kidney infections in a year, and they might remove it. I went to my gynecologist who helped me, even though it wasn't her speciality. And when I got the test results from a sample collection we did over 24 hours, she told me not to wait to do something about my kidney function. And so in April 2010, I attended a nephrologist and an endocrinologist, and together it was decided, because of the decrease in my kidney function, which is now 24 to 25%, which isn't great by any stretch of the imagination, they removed it for me. Sorry, I'm trying to find it, because the slides are not. Oh, there it is. Lithium therapy policy. Sorry. In recent years, Mayo Mental Health Services have now got a detailed checklist and consent form before beginning lithium signed by client and consultant. Information booklet, tell them about lithium so that they don't forget what's been told them at the appointment. A record diary that they bring to their consultations, which record their lithium, serum test results and other test results, because lithium toxicity, even one bout of lithium toxicity, permanently damages the kidneys. The record diary is to be brought for the purpose that the thyroid test and the lithium test are recorded each time, and other associated tests with it. In an emergency, they have a mini card in emergencies taking lithium. I'm hoping that this should reduce the incidence of CKD and thyroid problems associated with lithium therapy. I don't think we have time to go into much more of this in detail. Just before I do finish, I'll just go briefly into this Champix, which is a medication for giving up cigarettes. I asked my consultant endocrinologist to refer me to the smoking cessation nurse in the hospital. Note, it was me that requested the referral, not the other way around. We discussed various methods to give up my smoking, and then she told me Champix, this new medication on the market. She gave me the leaflet to read in front of her, which I did, and the first thing I noticed was mood swings. I advised her that I have a mood swing disorder. She undertook a risk assessment and discovered that there's significant risk to my mental health, and this medication could not be prescribed. She would not prescribe this. In August 2009, when I went to the endocrinology unit again, I got a young intern, and I knew when I went into the room that it had already been decided what was going to be prescribed, Champix. And immediately I said to him, I can't, I have a mood disorder. And the reason why, because it actually changes the function in the brain. He didn't assess my risk. He went into the consultant in his room And basically, he had not got the manners, the courtesy, or the decency to remove himself from his room to converse with me to assess the risk of this medication. The intern came back in, and it was just like, yes, you've been told this is this, and you have to take it. I know I should have trusted my gut instincts. I went to my GP with it, and she said to me, this in you is not a very good idea. But because it came from a consultant, she felt obliged to fill the prescription, and I was obliged to take it, with a warning that the first sign of a mood swing, and it was to stop. My mood swing began in November 2009, and I didn't recognise it for a month, and then after that the PCOS kicked in, and the mood swings went out of control. I had stopped the medication, but it was too late. It actually took me 2 years to recover from that mood swing episode. I spent 7 months in hospital between May and December 2011. After I had spiraled from a whole lot of events that had happened, which had been started off by the champions. And in hindsight, yes, I should have trusted my gut instinct, but it wasn't as simple as that. I was afraid that if I didn't go with this medication, I couldn't be guaranteed that when I went back to that unit that I would get the treatment for my other disorders as well. There's a lot more to this, but there just isn't time to do it. So I just say thank you for listening. And it's Inishine Inu Goramagas.
Hello everyone, and it's my great pleasure to be here and help Fiona about this, because I'm located to this building, but it's my first time to have a presentation here, so it's special to me. And but you will see there is a very clear contrast with a powerful narrative, personal narrative, and a very growing school of law fashion response. And I have to deal with the technical issues. Okay. So I have just a number of very brief responses to Fiona's story. And the number one, I think there's no real consent on the poverty treatment. I believe this will be repeated for many times today in the remaining of this workshop. And it's clearly suggested by Tina in the first beginning, and discussed by Fiona's story about her experience by listening therapy and her awful experience in the admission interview and a number of other experiences. So I think it's very obvious and we don't have to spend more time on this. And secondly, another thing very clear from Fiona's story, her inspiration towards her experience about informed consent is not just about mental health law, which authorized involuntary treatment. It's also about the operation of the medical system. And one thing Fiona did not mention is that there in Irish context, this is new to me also, there's one psychiatrist per region. And Fiona said if you feel any complaints against him or her, it's very possible or definitely you will not be seen anymore. So this is not something about mental health law, it's just the operation of the medical system. It's also true about the stigma and the discrimination about the whole mental health system. Once you are diagnosed with a mental health disorder, it's very possible that you will be not taken seriously of your physical disease and other series of the issues. And my third response is that Fiona's story suggests a clear contrast between the consequences of respecting and ignoring her opinion. You know, we have a very intense 15 minutes of Fiona story about the lesion therapy and the champion therapy with negative, but in our private discussion, and I believe that Fiona can comment a little bit about a positive experience about if the psychiatrist is willing to listen to her and listen to trusting her to read, to making research about medication she's going to take. Would you say something on this? You can.
Yes, yes, yeah. Just to begin with, I was admitted for a fortnight to the psychiatric unit in Galway in September 2010. I was then referred to Mayo Mental Health Services as I had to move back to Mayo. In October 2010, after a decade of an absence from the mental health services of that region, this was difficult as my previous interaction had left quite a bit of aftertaste, particularly in reference to my mismanaged lithium therapy. There was a new consultant, psychiatrist I was referred to, and it took several months to ascertain that I was spiraling, particularly after the death of my mother. This led to my eventual hospitalization for that 7 months. It took 2 years to recover from the aftermath of Champix and other difficulties, and my grief had escalated my mental and emotional disarray. However, while I was sick, and I was really very ill at the time, I did retain my full capacity. During my hospitalization in 2011, my psychiatrist broached the topic of using this medication called Epilon, which is an epileptic mood stabilizer that can be used. I previously tried Tegretol, which is another epileptic drug, and I also did Neurontin for my pain. I had adverse reactions to them, so I was kind of hesitant from the beginning that I'd have an adverse reaction to Epilon. But she said to me, don't give me an outright answer no. I was given information to read, and then so that I could come to the decision for myself. I came to the decision after reading the leaflet, and I said, no, I can't do this at this time. My decision was respected, and there was no intent to pressurize or influence me to change my mind. In 2016, the same psychiatrist again suggested it as a possible treatment to act as a mood stabilizing treatment. And despite my age and because of modern technology, I was informed of the effects this medication would have on a fetus. I was advised to research the medication, and as she said to me, you're a bright, intelligent young woman. So she told me to go away and spend some more time researching this subject of Epilon for myself again. I did this, and having read all I could, I made a negative decision again. The potential adverse effect on my liver was at the forefront of my mind, and I couldn't take the risk of adding to my already complicated and complex medical conditions. The saying, once bitten, twice shy, springs to mind. I informed the psychiatrist of my decision, and again there was no attempt to influence or change my mind. The difference in the approach to my treatment options and the confidence in my capability to critically assess and absorb information to make decisions are clearly in contrast to my previous experiences, such as the lithium therapy. My legal capacity and consent capabilities were not considered issues, nor were they raised on both of these occasions.
Thank you, Fiona. And I think again, it suggests a very clear contrast about, the result, whether there's respect or not. And also linked to another issue, another response is that in Fiona's time, there's no law in Ireland that introducing a functionalist assessment of a legal capacity. And in Fiona's story, it's never been formally denied her legal capacity to make decisions. And whether this will be changed by the new legislation, I think it's open to observation. It's open to discuss and be researched in the future when it is formally confirmed. And but speaking of the functional test about the legal capacity, is Fiona's case a story, is good case to argue against the functionalist, which argue that one's legal capacity can be assessed and it maybe should be assessed, understanding, appreciating, weighing, and making decisions and communicating. Of course, as I said in my first response, Fiona's story clearly suggests that there's a great benefit in respecting her legal capacity and making decision opinions anyway, regardless, without even attempting to deny her legal capacity. But still, if I'm wearing the shoes of the psychiatrist at this moment, I would say Fiona definitely, she can pass all the test, functional test, because she's willing to engage with the decision-making process of psychiatry, and she's willing to read and do research by herself. But as a psychiatrist, I will argue the functional test is designed for those who are not willing to do that. They refuse all the support. You know the arguments. So I think Fiona's case is very good and perfect example to show how well people can do without making a decision about other people's legal capacity. But maybe if we want to win the argument, but we are not necessary to win argument all the time. But if we want to win argument, we need another case to show that. But the last response myself is a more personal one. It's based on my own experience because I come from another jurisdiction. I come from China. So it was a surprise when I first heard Fiona's story is that she can work through all this stuff by herself. But in my experience, in my jurisdiction, that from family members, and if you are married, your parents, if you are married, your spouse, they play an essential role in all the decision making, not just about mental health, but also about all the health caring role. And part of the reason is that the family members are always the people who bear the consequence, who pay the bills, who pay our health insurance, which is not really well developed in China. So I'm starting thinking about what facilitates Fiona that she can do that by herself. Of course, with some positive stories and negative stories. And maybe one of them is maybe the welfare system or public insurance system. That can, she can decide which GP she goes and which medical professional she wants to consult with. And maybe another one is coming back again to the law, because in China we have a guardianship law. People have very quick assumption that people labeled with mental disorder, they will regarded as they are regarded incapable of making decisions themselves. So again, what's the future of Ireland, in the next several years, let's see, and I'm looking forward to meet you more in the future about these issues, and maybe Fiona can bring us more stories about herself. By the way, just closing up, I met Fiona before this project on a class because she's doing the master program of disability policy in the center. And this puts me in a very awkward position to making response because obviously we know equally about Irish law, international law on the same class, and I know much less about Irish context. So I hope, my response is beneficial to Fiona's story. And thank you very much for listening.
Fiona and Bob for this dialogue. And I think we have at least 10 minutes for questions and answers. I think we have many questions around the role of the law, the role of the psychiatric system, the role of personal relationships and cultural values. And just keep in mind that this panel of question and answers is for all the presentations of the morning. So we will try to take many at the beginning maybe, and then we come back with the response.
Thanks for your presentations, found it very interesting. I have a few quick questions. First of all, is there a timeline for the implementation of the CRPD in Irish law? And the second question is, how has Irish psychiatry reacted to the CRPD? For instance, have the clinicians and psychiatrists come out in favour of this change, this paradigm shift in terms of consent, and whether or not there's obstacles in terms of traditional thinking? I have my own psychiatrist, and the idea of him suddenly giving me right to refuse treatment